Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to do something very simple. I want you to just look at whatever's directly in front of you.
Okay.
Maybe it's a desk, maybe a steering wheel, a coffee cup, or, just your own hands.
Seems like a simple enough request.
It does. Now, here's the question. You assume that the object you're looking at is solid, right?
Mm-hmm.
You assume it's made of matter. And you definitely assume that if you closed your eyes or if you walked out of the room, that object would just sit there exactly as it is, waiting for you to come back.
Well, yeah, that's a fundamental assumption of pretty much all of human existence. The world is physical. It's made of stuff. It exists whether we're looking at it or not.
Well, today we are going to explore the mind of a man who looked at that very assumption, the absolute bedrock of our reality, and said, actually, I can prove that you are wrong.
And he wasn't kidding.
Not at all. He argued with this rigorous, almost terrifying logic that matter simply does not exist.
Mm-hmm. And we should be clear. We aren't talking about some guy in a basement with a wild conspiracy theory. We're talking about George Berkeley, one of the absolute giants of 18th century philosophy.
He's basically the Agent Smith of the 1700s, trying to tell us the Matrix isn't real. But before we get into the truly mind-bending philosophy, we have to settle the name.
Yes. The pronunciation.
Look, because if you are listening to this in America, and especially in California, you're probably thinking of the famous university city, Berkeley.
Right. And while the city is, in fact, named after him, the man himself was Anglo-Irish. And in his time, and still in the UK today, the pronunciation is
Berkeley.
So out of respect for the man who is about to dismantle our reality, we'll be sticking with Berkeley for this deep dive.
So Bishop Berkeley, he lived from 1685 to 1753. And looking at this stack of research we have today, biographies, letters, his own philosophical treatises, this guy is just a walking paradox.
He really is. I mean, on one hand, he's this high-ranking, very respectable Anglican bishop. On the other, he's a radical philosopher whose ideas profoundly influence people like David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and even, some would argue, Albert Einstein.
And then you get to his personal life, and it just reads like an adventure novel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got a failed utopian city in the middle of the Atlantic,
Mm-hmm.
a weird inheritance scandal involving the author of Gulliver's Travels,
A very strange story.
a stint as a slave-owning plantation farmer in Rhode Island, of all places, and a final chapter where he becomes completely obsessed with a miracle cure made of tree sap.
It is a wild ride, but the mission for us today is to try and connect these dots. We want to understand how a man can claim the physical world is an illusion, yet still be considered a genius rather than, a madman.
Exactly. I'm ready to have my brain broken. So where does a character like this even begin?
He begins in Ireland, in Kilkenny. He was born in 1685 at a place called Dysart Castle.
A castle. Okay, so that sounds pretty impressive. Was he from nobility?
Not exactly high nobility, but he was definitely part of what was called the Anglo-Irish ascendancy.
That was the Protestant ruling class in Ireland at the time.
Exactly. His father was a cadet of the noble Berkeley family, so they had status, they had land. And George, well, he was clearly brilliant from the very beginning. He goes to Kilkenny College and then straight on to Trinity College Dublin.
And he didn't just attend. By all accounts, he basically dominated the board.
Oh, absolutely. He was elected a scholar in 1702 and then a fellow in 1707. Now, for context, that meant he had a secure, prestigious academic position at a very, very young age.
So he's not just sitting around in an ivory tower pondering existence.
Not at all. He was incredibly active. He was a librarian, a lecturer in Greek. He taught Hebrew, and he was an ordained preacher. He was a very busy man.
I do love the image of him as a librarian. It feels so fitting for a guy who thought the entire world was made of ideas.
It does, doesn't it?
But he didn't stay cooped up in Dublin forever. He did what all the, cool rich kids did back then. He went on a big road trip.
The Grand Tour. It was a rite of passage. Between about 1714 and 1720, he traveled extensively through Europe.
And being Berkeley, I'm guessing he didn't just do the standard tourist stops in Paris and Rome.
Oh, not at all. He undertook one of the most thorough tours of Italy ever recorded. I mean, he walked the length and breadth of the country. There are reports he even climbed down into the crater of Mount Vesuvius, which was active at the time.
He's climbing active volcanoes, and interestingly enough, he's also acting as a kind of talent scout. I read that he discovered an artist named John Smibert while he was in Italy.
Yes, that's a fascinating side story. Smibert was a Scottish artist working in Italy. Berkeley met him, recognized his talent, and basically took him under his wing. He eventually convinced Smibert to join him on his later adventures in America.
And Smibert becomes a big deal.
A huge deal. John Smibert is now widely considered the founding father of American portrait painting. So, just as a little side hobby, Berkeley helped kickstart the entire history of American art.
That is a serious side quest achievement. Now, before we get to that American chapter, we have to talk about the money. Because in 1723, Berkeley comes into a fortune. And it's in this incredibly dramatic, almost scandalous way.
The Vanessa affair. Oh, this is straight out of an 18th century gossip column.
Okay, set the scene for us.
There was a woman named Esther Van Omri. She was known in society by the name Vanessa. She was the longtime, very intimate companion of Jonathan Swift.
The guy who wrote Gulliver's Travels.
The very same. They were extremely close for years. But shortly before she died, she discovered that Swift had secretly married another woman.
Oh, wow.
And she and Swift had a massive, apparently violent quarrel. We don't know exactly what was said, but she was absolutely furious. So on her deathbed, she rewrote her will.
And I'm guessing she cut Swift out.
Completely. And in his place, she named George Berkeley as her co-heir.
What? Why him?
That's the craziest part. Berkeley barely knew her. He'd met her father years before, but they weren't close friends. It was a complete shock. He suddenly inherits a significant sum of money purely because she wanted to spite Jonathan Swift from beyond the grave.
Talk about a lucky break. Although, didn't he lose a good chunk of it in legal battles?
He did. Lawsuits were practically the national sport of the 18th century, but he kept enough to completely change the course of his life. And this new wealth allowed him to pivot from being an academic theorist to a visionary man of action.
And this brings us to the American dream part of the story. But Berkeley's dream wasn't about getting rich. It was about building a utopia.
That's right, the Bermuda Project. In 1725, Berkeley published a proposal to found a college in Bermuda, which he very romantically called the Summer Islands.
Bermuda, that seems incredibly remote. Why there?
It was remote, but in his mind, that was part of the appeal. It was this perfect, centralized location, untainted by the corruptions of Europe, where he could train ministers and missionaries.
Or what was the plan for them?
The plan was they would then spread the Anglican religion and what he saw as refined English culture throughout the American colonies and to the Native American populations. He had this very romanticized view of the West as a new Eden.
And he was incredibly committed to this. I mean, this wasn't just some passing whim.
Oh, no. This is where you really have to admire his conviction, even if you question the plan. At this time, he was a dean in the church. He held a deanery that was worth £1,100 a year.
And in the 1720s, that's an enormous amount of money.
It's a massive, life-changing salary. You are set for life with that kind of income.
And he gave it up.
He resigned the deanery and accepted a salary of just £100 a year to pursue the Bermuda Project. He literally took a 90% pay cut for his ideals.
It is really putting your money where your mouth is.
He then spent years lobbying London society. He charmed all the big names, Alexander Pope, Joseph Addison, Richard Steele. He even lobbied the House of Commons directly.
And it worked.
Miraculously, yes. Parliament actually promised him a grant of £20,000 to build this college. That is an astronomical sum for the time.
So with a promise of money in his pocket and a heart full of hope, he set sail.
In 1728, he marries a woman named Anne Forster, and they head across the Atlantic. But, and this is a key detail, they don't go straight to Bermuda. They land in Newport, Rhode Island.
I had no idea Berkeley ever lived in the colonies.
He lived there for about 3 years. He bought a 96-acre farm in Middletown, Rhode Island, and he named it Whitehall.
And while he's there, he's not just sitting around. For the architecture geeks listening, Berkeley is actually credited with introducing Palladianism to America.
That's that very symmetrical classical style, right? With the columns and the pediments.
Exactly. He apparently borrowed a design for his front door case from the famous English architect William Kent. It seems like a tiny detail, but that style became the dominant visual language of the American colonial period. If you picture a prestigious colonial building, like Monticello or the White House, you're picturing a style that Berkeley helped to import. So he's farming, he's designing door frames, and he's waiting for his £20,000 check from the British Parliament.
And he waits, and he waits, and he waits.
Now, while we were in Rhode Island,
we
have to address a very difficult part of the record here. The outline mentions the controversy.
Yes, and it's important we don't shy away from this. To get a full picture of the man, you have to look at the whole story. The historical records from his time in Rhode Island are perfectly clear. George Berkeley purchased enslaved Africans to work on his plantation at Whitehall.
So he wasn't just a passive observer of slavery, he was an active participant in the institution.
Correct. And this wasn't a case of him, privately struggling with it while publicly conforming. He baptized 3 of the enslaved people he owned, but he also publicly and explicitly defended the institution of slavery.
In what way?
He argued that becoming a Christian did not entitle an enslaved person to freedom. He saw slavery as entirely compatible with his theology, which for us today is, well, it's a shocking and abhorrent position.
And this has had real consequences for his legacy, even right up to the present day, hasn't it?
Very recently, yes. In 2023, Trinity College Dublin, the university where he was a fellow and an absolute legend, made the decision to remove his name from their main library.
Wow.
It had been the Berkeley Library for decades. They officially renamed it the Evan Boland Library in 2024 after the great Irish poet.
And the university was explicit about the reason for this.
Yes, completely. They issued a statement saying it was specifically because of his ownership of enslaved people and his active written defense of slavery. They've adopted what they call a retain and explain approach for other artifacts, like a stained glass window featuring him.
So they keep the history visible, but they add context panels to explain the full, and in this case, very ugly reality.
Exactly. It's that complexity we mentioned at the start. A brilliant philosophical mind, capable of profound insight, yet also fully enmeshed in the brutalities and prejudices of his era.
It's a tough thing to reconcile.
It is. So back in Rhode Island, around 1731, the dream finally falls apart.
The check never came.
The prime minister at the time was a man named Robert Walpole. And Walpole was a famous pragmatist. He looked at the plan and basically thought, a utopian college on a tiny island in the Atlantic. This is a waste of money. The funds were blocked. They never arrived. Berkeley realized it was over.
That must have been absolutely crushing. I mean, he gave up his fortune, he moved his family across the world, and he basically got ghosted by the government.
It was a huge failure. So he packs up his family and returns to London in 1732. But before he leaves America, he does something that has a massive and lasting impact on American history.
What's that?
He donates his farm, Whitehall, and his entire massive personal library, nearly 1,000 volumes, to the fledgling Yale College.
To Yale? Why Yale?
He had become friendly with some of its tutors, and that donation effectively doubled the size of Yale's library at the time. It brought rigorous Anglican scholarship and European philosophy into the heart of Puritan New England. So even though his own college failed, he unwittingly helped build the intellectual foundation of what would become the Ivy League.
That's a fascinating and ironic twist. But let's get to the main event. The reason he's in the history books isn't just because he farmed in Rhode Island. It's because of his core idea, the immaterialist thesis.
So it's percipi.
To be perceived.
That's the bumper sticker, yes.
Okay, let's unpack this slowly. Because when you say matter doesn't exist, my brain instinctively fights it. I'm holding a pen right now. It feels hard, it has weight. If I drop it on the desk, it makes a noise. How can a certified genius claim this isn't real?
This is the key. Berkeley would say, I never said the pen isn't real. I said matter isn't real. There's a difference.
Okay.
Here's how he breaks it down. He argues that the entire universe consists of only 2 things. First, there are spirits.
Spirits, okay.
These are active, thinking, perceiving minds. You are a spirit. I am a spirit. Anything that is conscious and has a will.
Got it, minds.
Second, there are ideas. These are the passive things. They are sensations, thoughts, feelings, memories, everything that a spirit can perceive.
So, spirit and idea, that's the entire list. There's nothing else.
That is the complete inventory of the universe, according to Berkeley. Now, think about an apple. When you experience an apple, what actually happens in your mind?
I see redness. I feel a smooth skin. I smell a certain scent.
You taste sweetness. You hear a crunch when you bite into it. All of those things, redness, smoothness, sweetness, crunchiness, are what?
Sensations. They're ideas in my mind.
Exactly. They are ideas. Berkeley then asks the killer question. Does redness exist out there in the world if there's no eye to see it?
No, that's just light waves.
Does sweetness exist if there's no tongue to taste it?
No, that's just a chemical structure.
So if you strip away all of these qualities that depend on a mind, the color, the texture, the smell, the taste, the sound, what is left of the apple?
Nothing.
Precisely. Berkeley argues that an object is nothing more than the collection, the bundle of these perceived ideas. We have this habit of assuming there's some invisible, colorless, tasteless, silent stuff underneath it all, a substance we call matter that holds all these qualities together.
Right, a substrate.
But Berkeley says that's a complete fiction. It's an unnecessary, unprovable fantasy. He says, try to imagine an unperceived object. Try to imagine a tree in a forest when absolutely no one, no mind, is perceiving it.
Okay, I'm picturing a tree in a forest. No one's around.
But you are picturing it. It is an idea in your mind right now. You haven't escaped perception. You can't. The very act of conceiving of an unperceived thing makes it a perceived thing.
Okay, he's got me in a logical box there. But this leads to the classic, college dorm room philosophy question.
I know where you're going.
If I walk out of this room and no one is here to perceive the microphone,
Yeah.
does the microphone just disappear, pop out of existence?
This is the hurdle everyone trips over. And it's a fair question. If to be is to be perceived and no human is perceiving it, it should vanish. But Berkeley has a very powerful answer. He says, no, of course it stays.
Why?
Because there is another perceiver, an infinite, omnipresent, eternal mind that perceives everything all at once and always. God. Berkeley argues that the entire universe is, in essence, an idea in the mind of God. The universe is held in existence moment to moment because it is being constantly perceived by God.
That is a huge shift from the science of his day, right?
Oh, it's a massive shift. The dominant scientific view, the Newtonian view, was that God was a kind of cosmic watchmaker.
Right. He builds the universe, winds it up, and then lets it run on its own according to physical laws.
Exactly. God was distant, he set the machine in motion, and then stepped back. Berkeley's God is the exact opposite of that.
So Berkeley's God is not a watchmaker. He's a what? A live streamer, constantly broadcasting reality to us.
That's actually a pretty good modern analogy. Berkeley argues that what we call nature, or the laws of physics, the sun rising, gravity pulling things down, the seasons changing, is really a visual language spoken by God.
A language.
Yes, God is actively and directly generating these ideas in our minds in a consistent, reliable order. The reason the table is still there when you turn around and look back is that God is consistently maintaining that idea for you and for everyone else.
It sounds surprisingly similar to modern simulation theory.
It is the 18th century theological version of simulation theory. If you think about a complex video game, the world only renders because the computer code is telling the screen what pixels to display. There's no physical rock inside your computer's memory. There's just code generating the idea of a rock.
So Berkeley's saying there's no physical rock in the universe. There is just God's code, God's ideas being fed directly to our spirits.
That is a perfect way to put it. He removes the hardware of the universe matter and leaves only the software, spirits, and ideas.
And he didn't just rely on faith to prove this. He used some pretty sharp logical arguments to try and dismantle the whole idea of materialism. You mentioned the likeness principle.
The likeness principle. It's very clever. He said, quite simply, an idea can only be like another idea.
What does that mean?
Well, you can compare the memory of a table to a photograph of a table. You can compare your idea of a tree to my idea of a tree. Both are ideas. But he argues you can never, ever compare an idea of a table in your mind to a so-called physical table that exists outside of any mind.
Because I can't get outside my own head to look at the real one and see if it matches.
Exactly. You are permanently locked inside the theater of your own perceptions. So to assume there is a physical world out there that perfectly matches your mental world is a huge leap of faith that you can never, ever verify. It's an unnecessary hypothesis.
He also loved to use something called the bucket experiment to mess with people's assumptions.
Yes, this was his brilliant response to John Locke. Locke was the big philosopher before Berkeley, and he tried to save a version of materialism. Locke argued that objects have primary qualities, things like size, shape, motion, which are real and objective and exist in the object itself.
Okay.
And then they have secondary qualities, things like heat, color, taste, which are subjective and only exist in our minds.
So for Locke, a campfire log is objectively cylindrical. That's a primary quality. But it's not objectively hot. Hot is just a feeling, a secondary quality.
Precisely. And Locke proved that heat was subjective with the famous bucket experiment. You take 3 buckets of water, 1 hot, 1 cold, and 1 lukewarm. You put your left hand in the hot water and your right hand in the cold water. You leave them there for a minute. Then you plunge both hands into the lukewarm bucket at the same time.
Right. And the hand that was in the hot water will feel the lukewarm water as cold. And the hand that was in the cold water will feel the lukewarm water as hot.
Exactly. The water itself is only one temperature, but your senses are reporting two completely different things. Therefore, Locke said, aha, heat is not in the water, it is in the mind.
That seems like a pretty solid argument.
It is, but Berkeley steps in and says, hold on, this doesn't just apply to heat and color, this applies to everything. He says, take size.
Okay.
If you look at a castle from 10 miles away, it looks like a tiny speck on the horizon. If you stand right at its base, it's a towering, immense wall. The apparent size changes dramatically based on your perception.
Right, that's perspective.
Or take shape. Look at a coin straight on, it's a perfect circle. Look at it from an angle, it's an oval. Look at it from the edge, it's a thin, flat line. So which one is the real shape?
So if size and shape change depending on where I'm standing and how I'm looking.
Then they are relative to the observer, just like heat and cold. They are mind-dependent. And if size and shape are in the mind, then Locke's distinction between primary and secondary qualities completely collapses. Nothing is primary. Everything exists in perception.
That is devastatingly simple. He just takes Locke's own weapon and uses it against him.
It's a perfect logical judo move. He uses his opponent's momentum to flip the whole argument on its head.
And this feeds directly into his work on vision, too. I was reading about an essay towards a new theory of vision from 1709. He made the radical claim that we don't actually see distance at all.
This is one of his most lasting contributions, actually. It had a huge influence on the psychology of perception. Berkeley argued that the retina, the back of your eye, is a two-dimensional surface. It's flat. It can only register patterns of light and color.
So it's like a movie screen.
Exactly, and you cannot see the third dimension depth on a 2D surface. A line coming straight at your eye just looks like a single point. It has no visible length.
So, how do I know that my coffee cup is 2 feet away and the door is 20 feet away? I feel like I'm seeing that distance.
Berkeley says you're not seeing it, you are inferring it. You've learned it through habit and association. Your brain sees a collection of visual cues, an object looking smaller or fainter in color or a bit blurry, or how your eyes have to converge to focus on it. And your brain says, aha, based on all my past experiences of walking over to things and reaching out and touching them, this particular set of visual cues means far away.
So vision is basically a language that our brains learn to read over time.
Precisely. He used a wonderful analogy. He compared it to seeing a person with a red face and inferring that they are embarrassed. You don't literally see the emotion of embarrassment. You see the color, and through social learning, you infer the emotion. In the same way you don't see distance. You see light and patterns and infer space.
He even tried to prove this with a real-life medical case, didn't he? The so-called cataract boy.
The Molyneux problem. This was a famous thought experiment that philosophers had argued about for years. The question was, if a man who was born blind could suddenly be made to see, could he distinguish a cube from a sphere just by looking at them without touching them first?
And Berkeley's answer was a firm no.
A firm no, because, he argued, the man has not yet learned the language of vision. He hasn't associated the visual idea of a cube with the tactile idea of a cube.
And then a real-world test case came along.
It did. In 1728, a surgeon named William Cheselden performed a groundbreaking operation on a 13-year-old boy, Daniel Dollins, removing his congenital cataracts.
What happened when the boy could see for the first time?
The report published by the surgeon claimed the boy was completely confused. He couldn't judge distances at all. He apparently thought all objects were touching his eyes, just as things he felt with his hands touched his skin. He couldn't tell a cat from a dog without touching them. Berkeley seized on this immediately and claimed it was total vindication for his theory.
See, I told you so.
Exactly. Although, I do have to add the expert caveat here. Modern historians and philosophers of science have looked at this and, well, the story is a bit murky. Some scholars have pointed out that Berkeley knew the surgeon, Cheselden, and the language in the final published report uses some very specific Berkeleyan philosophical phrases. There's a suspicion that Berkeley might have, well, ghost-written or at least heavily influenced parts of that report to fit his theory.
No way. Are you serious?
It's a plausible theory. Also, the poor boy's vision was never very good even after the surgery, so the data was messy from the start. But in the 18th century, Berkeley definitely took a big victory lap with it.
He really was a fighter, wasn't he? Which brings us to his battle with the mathematicians. Because he didn't just stay in his lane of metaphysics and theology, he went after the hard sciences.
This is my absolute favorite Berkeley era. In 1734, he publishes this book called The Analyst.
And that's the one with the incredible subtitle.
That's the one. A discourse addressed to an infidel mathematician.
So subtle. Who's he mad at?
He was angry at the whole scientific establishment, but the infidel mathematician is widely believed to be Edmund Halley, the astronomer of Halley's Comet fame.
Okay, so what was the argument?
Well, scientists and mathematicians of the day were starting to get very cocky. They were mocking religion, saying things like, "You religious people believe in mysteries and invisible things you can't prove. Like the Trinity. That's irrational. We scientists only deal in cold, hard, logical proof."
And Berkeley decided to flip the script on them.
He basically said, "You want to talk about believing in irrational nonsense? Fine. Let's take a close look at your new holy scripture. Calculus."
He went after calculus, the greatest invention of Isaac Newton. That's bold.
Incredibly bold, but he had a point.
Yeah.
At the time, the logical foundations of calculus were frankly a mess. Newton and Leibniz used these concepts called fluxions and infinitesimals.
Infinitesimals, I've heard the term. What are they?
They're meant to be an infinitely small quantity. To solve a problem, a mathematician would take a quantity, let's call it O, and treat it as a tiny but non-zero amount so they could do algebra with it, like divide by it.
Okay, so it's a very, very small number, but it's not zero.
Correct. But then, and this is what Berkeley spotted, at the very end of the equation, to get the clean final answer, they would just treat that same quantity O as if it were zero and throw it away.
Wait a minute. You can't do that. It can't be not zero at the start of the problem and then zero at the end of the problem. That's a contradiction.
That was Berkeley's entire point. He said it was logically incoherent. You can't have it both ways. And this is where he coined one of the greatest insults in the entire history of mathematics. He called these infinitesimals the ghosts of departed quantities.
The ghosts of departed quantities. That is beautiful. It's poetry.
It's perfect, isn't it? A quantity that was just there, doing mathematical work, and then it vanishes without a trace, like a ghost. He argued that the mathematicians were accepting just as much mystery and bad logic in their own field as they accused theologians of having in theirs.
And the really crazy thing is, he was right, wasn't he?
He was completely 100% right. The calculus worked. It gave the right answers for building bridges and predicting the orbits of planets. But the logical foundation it was built on was broken.
So what happened?
It took mathematicians nearly another century, people like Cauchy and Weierstrass in the 19th century, to formally develop the concept of limits, to fix the very logical holes that Bishop Berkeley had pointed out.
So the philosopher who didn't believe in matter actually corrected the foundational logic of the greatest scientists on Earth.
He demanded rigor. And he didn't stop there. He also went after Newton's physics, specifically the ideas of absolute space and time.
Right. Newton believed that space was like a giant, invisible container that existed on its own, even if it was completely empty.
And Berkeley applied his, if it can't be perceived, it's meaningless rule. He wrote a work called De Motu, or On Motion, and he argued that motion is always relative.
How so?
He used a simple thought experiment. Imagine a universe with only one single body in it. Just one ball floating in an infinite void. Could that ball move?
No, I guess not, because there's nothing for it to move towards or away from. There's no reference point.
Exactly. Motion is a relationship between at least two objects. If you remove the objects, the concepts of motion and space cease to have any meaning. You can't perceive an empty space.
That sounds a lot like Einstein's theory of relativity.
It's a direct precursor. The great philosopher of science Karl Popper explicitly called Berkeley a forerunner to both Ernst Mach and Albert Einstein for this insight.
Wow.
Popper even coined the term Berkeley's razor.
Like Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually the best.
It's similar, but sharper. Berkeley's razor says we should eliminate all essentialist explanations. Don't invent mysterious, unperceivable things like absolute space or gravity as a force. Just describe the observed regularities in a mathematical way. Don't invent invisible stuff.
He really, really hated invisible stuff. If he couldn't perceive it, he wanted it gone from the explanation.
Consistency was his absolute superpower.
But consistency was his superpower until we get to the very end of his life. Because now, I think we have to talk about the tar water.
Ah, yes, the tar water phase. The final strange chapter.
This part of the story feels like a plot twist that the writers just threw in at the last minute. We go from dismantling calculus and predicting Einstein to selling snake oil.
It is genuinely bizarre. In 1744, he publishes a book called Cirrus. a chain of philosophical reflections and inquiries concerning the virtues of tar water.
So what on earth is Cirrus about?
It is a chain of philosophical reflections concerning the virtues of tar water.
If you're not joking, it's literally about pine tar mixed with water.
Yes. The recipe was to take pine tar, mix it with water, let the heavy tar settle to the bottom, and then you drink the clear water that's left. Berkeley became utterly convinced that this was a panacea.
A cure-all.
A cure-all. He claimed it could cure smallpox, ulcers, asthma, indigestion, scurvy, you name it. He thought tar water could fix it.
Was he... Okay, I mean, what prompted this? Why was he pushing this so hard?
It actually started from a humanitarian impulse. He was serving as a bishop in a very poor part of Ireland called Cloyne, and he saw terrible poverty and disease all around him. He wanted to find a cheap, accessible medicine that anyone could make at home. He had heard reports from colonists in America about the supposed medicinal properties of tar, and he convinced himself it was the answer.
So his heart was in the right place. He was trying to help people.
He was. But he didn't just write down a recipe. The book Cirrus is one of the strangest texts in all of philosophy. It starts with the chemical makeup of pine tar, then it moves on to discuss the vital fire of the universe, which then leads him to the ancient Greek philosophers, and the book ends with a contemplation of the Holy Trinity.
I'm sorry, he connected pine sap to the nature of God.
He did. He had this whole theory that the tar coming from pine trees that reach for the sun contained a concentrated form of the sun's vital spirit, which ultimately flows from God. It was a grand unified theory of tar.
So, did people actually buy this?
They went absolutely crazy for it. Get this. Cirrus was actually his single best-selling book during his lifetime.
You're kidding me.
Not at all. Far more people in the 1740s knew him as the tar water bishop than as the matter doesn't exist bishop. Tar water became a huge fad in London society. People were drinking it everywhere.
It's almost humbling, isn't it? You can be one of the most brilliant logicians in Europe, and your biggest hit is a recipe for tree juice.
It just goes to show that even geniuses are not immune to wanting a magic bullet for their health problems.
So we have the man, the wild philosophy, the takedown of math, and the tar. Well, look at the legacy. How did the world react to his core idea, his immaterialism?
In his own time, mostly with mockery and confusion. The most famous story, the one everyone knows, involves Dr. Samuel Johnson, the great man of letters and dictionary writer.
The rock-kicking story.
The rock-kicking story. Johnson is walking with his biographer, James Boswell, and they're discussing Berkeley's theory that matter doesn't exist. Johnson gets frustrated with the whole idea, so he kicks a large stone with mighty force until his foot rebounds, and he shouts, "I refute it thus."
I refute it thus. It's such an iconic, common-sense comeback.
It is iconic, but as a philosopher, I have to point out, Johnson completely and totally missed the point.
How so? I mean, he proved the rock was hard and solid.
Berkeley never, ever denied that the rock was hard. He never denied the sensation of solidity or the sensation of resistance or the sensation of pain in your toe if you kick it. Berkeley would just say, yes, of course, God gave you the idea of a solid rock, and when you kicked it, he gave you the idea of pain. Johnson proved he had a sensation. He did absolutely nothing to prove there was an unperceivable material substance causing it.
So Dr. Johnson just stubbed his toe for nothing.
Pretty much. He refuted a position Berkeley never held.
Other writers took shots at him too, right?
Hmm.
I think Lord Byron wrote a little jab about him.
He did. In his epic poem Don Juan, he wrote the lines, "When Bishop Berkeley said there was no matter, and proved it 'twas no matter what he said."
That's a solid 19th century pun.
A very solid pun. And Herman Melville, in his novel Marty, has some characters joking about being on a ghost ship, but still having palates perfectly capable of appreciating a good plum pudding. It's a clear nod to the idea that even if the world is just an illusion, the pudding still tastes good.
But his legacy isn't just a series of literary jokes. I mean, his name is literally on the map of the United States.
The University of California, Berkeley.
Yeah.
And the city of Berkeley that surrounds it.
It is just wild to me that the absolute epicenter of the 1960s counterculture is named after an 18th century slave-owning Irish bishop. How on earth did that happen?
It goes all the way back to his failed Bermuda project. To promote the idea, he wrote a poem called Verses on the Prospect of Planting Arts and Learning in America.
He was a poet, too. Is there anything he didn't do?
He was a decent one, and that poem contains one very, very famous line. Westward, the course of empire takes its way.
Westward, the course of empire takes its way.
Yep.
I've heard that. That sounds like the unofficial slogan for Manifest Destiny.
It essentially became that. And in the 19th century, when the founders of the new University of California were looking for a site, They stood on a hill overlooking the Golden Gate and the Pacific Ocean, the ultimate West, and one of them recalled that line from Berkeley's poem. They named the site Berkeley in his honor.
So despite the spectacular failure of his college in Bermuda, his educational legacy succeeded in a way he never could have possibly imagined.
And, of course, Yale still has a residential college named after him to honor that massive donation of his farm and his books that helped build the university.
And Trinity College in Dublin has the stained glass window, but not the library anymore.
A complicated legacy, as we said.
So let's try to wrap this up. We have a man who is just a bundle of contradictions.
A bishop who fundamentally questioned the nature of physical reality. A slave owner who gave up a personal fortune to try and build a utopian college. A fierce critic of calculus who accidentally paved the way for its modern logical foundations.
And a seller of tar water, who also happened to be one of the sharpest metaphysicians in history.
That about sums it up.
So what is the big takeaway? Why should you, listening right now, care about George Berkeley in the 21st century?
I think Berkeley challenges us to do something we rarely do. Question our most basic assumptions. We go through our entire lives assuming we know what reality is. We think we see the world objectively as it truly is. Berkeley grabs us by the shoulders and says, no, you don't. All you ever have and all you ever can have is your own perception.
It's a profound lesson in intellectual humility. We are all locked inside our own experience of the world.
And in our modern world, with virtual reality, with AI-generated images, with deepfakes, the line between perception and reality is getting blurrier and more confusing every single day. Berkeley was asking these questions 300 years before the Apple Vision Pro.
He really was.
Yeah.
And I'll leave you with a final thought, listener. If Berkeley is right, and if to be is to be perceived, what happens to all the parts of the universe we haven't seen yet?
The bottom of the Marianas Trench. The dark side of a planet orbiting a distant star.
Exactly. Does the unobserved universe exist right now in all its detail only because God is watching it? Or is it all waiting there in some state of non-existence, just waiting for a conscious mind, one of us, to look at it and in that very act, bring it into being?
That is a thought that will keep you up at night.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Keep perceiving, everyone.